Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today I am giving you a full tutorial on the Rodecaster Pro II. There are so many things to learn about this thing that we just don't have time for the usual chit chat. Hope you're doing fine. Let me know down in the comments. Let's get right to it. Alright, so the first thing you're going to do, obviously, you're going to connect your microphones to the Rodecaster Pro II, connect your microphone to the XLR cable, and then connect the other end of the XLR cable to the Rodecaster. If you're using any instruments or anything like that that require a line in, the input that you use to plug the mics in is actually a hybrid, so you just plug it right into the same holes. Okay, now that that part's done, all we got to do is set up the microphones themselves. So we're going to actually press the button at the top of the fader here for the microphone that you plugged in. Now they do have the presets up here, and you can go through them. If you scroll on through, you can see all the different ones. We discussed this in our previous video, but they also have very generic ones for just dynamic and condenser if the brand that you use doesn't line up with any of these. So like I said, they have a lot of the Rode ones, but then they also have, towards the end, you see the RE20 and the SM7B, so cool on them. I'm currently using the Rode Procaster, so I'm set up on that. But like I said, if you went to dynamic or condenser, it would just go to a generic profile, and then you would have to set a lot of settings on your own. But a few things it would automatically set, for example, it would actually turn on your phantom power if you had a condenser microphone. This is a dynamic, so we don't want to do that. That can mess up the microphone. And it also sets a little bit of your processing for you. So for example, I can look at the EQ and you can see it's actually done a little bit of work with the EQ. You can actually change this on your own by using the magic knob and adjust any of the settings. As you click through them, you see how they highlight, and you could do that to every single one of the settings there. Now, again, some of the other things you can do for processing, you just click, again, all touchscreen. You have a high pass filter, you have a de-esser, so you can actually see it at work. You can see it dipping in the appropriate spots, so that means it's working, right? You've got your noise gate. I currently don't have my noise gate turned on just because I'm curious to see how it goes on its own anyways. You got to be very careful, as with any other noise gate, you turn it up too high. Anytime where you speak a little quieter than the noise gate, it'll cut off and then you'll be screwed because there's no getting that audio back. You got your compression right here. Now, just as kind of a side thing, I'm not going to tell you what to set all these things at. That is very dependent on what your voice is. We are all snowflakes, as it were. So I can't give you kind of a set it at these and everything's going to be okay. I do think that a 4:1 ratio for compression is good. But again, mess around with it a little bit. Hear how it makes you sound. Or if you know a creator who has sort of the same sound as you, like has the same kind of voice, maybe a little bit nasally, whatever. I don't know. I'm not judging. Then you can kind of listen to their things and you can see if they've got a video about how they set their audio. If I'm that person for you, let me know down in the comments and maybe we can make a short video about that sometime. And this one right here, this is the Exciter page. This is kind of like Aphex proprietary stuff. It's the big bottom and the oral exciter. It's really kind of boosts on the low end and the high end to kind of, you know, bring up your overall presence and sound. It was really kind of, you know, automatic in the Rodecaster Pro 1. In the 2, you can mess around with it a lot more, which is really cool. And here's the panning. You can bring yourself to left channel or right channel audio. You can do that with any of the sources here, so you can actually kind of create that mix on your own. If you have two people talking, you want one in the left ear, one in the right ear, then you can feel free to do that here rather than have to do all that stuff in post. While we're in this menu, we can have a look at the effects really quick. If we go into here, you can do some quick things like some echo and some reverb. So if I turn that on right now and I turn it on, now we have an echo. Hear me. And then I can turn on the reverb and do the exact same thing. And you can hear the general difference. Now it sounds just like I'm in a big room. And you can change the size of that room just by using the magic knob here and changing yourself to bigger or smaller rooms. And eventually it just sounds more and more normal as you get smaller, or you turn it off and it sounds completely normal. So coming back to square one, you can actually see that I've messed around a little bit with the order in which these sources exist on the faders, which is something you couldn't customize before. So let's get into how to actually set what you want where. You can do this in the software or on the mixer. I'll show you both. You go into settings and you go into your faders button here. Here's the actual order in which the faders are currently going. So you see all your physical faders, which are all these guys here, and you see your virtual faders, which are all the ones that magic knob takes care of. So you can drag them and drop them as you see fit. So if all of a sudden I want to bring the chat back in place of the Blu-ray, I can do that and see. You can see that the color actually changed. I'm going to do it again just so you can see it. Ah, excellent. And now the Bluetooth. I said Blu-ray the first time, didn't I? While we're in these settings menus, we might as well look at what else we have available to us here. So let's go to Outputs, and you have a bunch of different settings. So you have your headphones, and they actually have presets for your headphones, exactly like they have for the microphones. So they have the Rode NTH 100s, which I am wearing right now, and they're very, very nice, by the way. And they have high sensitivity and low sensitivity settings for different types of headphones, clearly showing earbuds and over-the-ear headphones. So if you go into monitor, you'll see a number of different options. You'll see the auto mute monitor output. What it'd do is mute those speakers as soon as you lifted the fader for any microphone source, because it'll avoid any feedback. And it'll do the same thing for your Bluetooth output, and you can also set a fixed output level to your monitors, so you can't raise and lower them. That's just what they are. Routing. So this is the big one right now. This is a routing table just like you have with Beacon or with Go XLR. Basically what you're doing is you're selecting which sources from here you actually want to go out to your mix. Now you can still hear them, you can still use them on this side, but they won't actually go to OBS or if you're recording to a DAW or anything like that. And this has been a really useful tool for streamers in recent years. If we look at our other options up here, we have our main mix, and all that does is put out every single channel that's in here out to the stereo mix. It does warn you it can cause some feedback if you use it inappropriately. The mix minus is the way to eliminate the problem we were just talking about, because the problem is audio coming from the computer into the Rodecaster Pro II and then being sent from that back into the computer, depending on what that source is and where it's recording to, can cause feedback. So the mix minus eliminates that by not sending the input back to the output. But I just recommend using the custom, and then you can select anything you want, however you want it. Okay, going to listen, you have some fun options here. So you have your after fader listen or your pre-fader listen. So right now I'm hearing these things in my headphones, and as I turn things up and down on the faders, the volume in my headphones goes up and down as well. Makes sense, right? But sometimes when you're like working with a mixer like this, you want to be able to hear things before you bring them up. So you can go to a pre-fader listen, so you can hear the native playout of every single source going into your headphones before you decide to turn it up or down. Now that's going to mean you're going to need to do a lot of like keeping an eye on the levels and stuff like that, because obviously you're not hearing it in your headphones at that point, or you're not hearing it correctly in your headphones at that point. So that's just something to be mindful of. So multitrack, much like your listen settings, you have a pre-fader and post-fader option for what you're actually recording onto the device. If you go pre-fader, then again, everything is just native audio, exactly how you get it. When it comes to microphones, what's considered native audio is how we set our levels in here. So that gives you a whole lot of freedom to go around and mess around with things in post. You can also set up your USB multitrack the same way. The USB multitrack is if you're recording to a DAW or something like that, you know, it's something like Audacity or what have you. Be mindful of your computer's capabilities, because I remember I used to try doing that to a laptop with the Rodecaster Pro I sending multi-channel, and it caused a lot of problems just because of the limitations of my laptop at the time. But what I honestly recommend when you're doing something like this, if you're going to do a multi-track recording, record to this device, move the file into your computer, and then load it into a DAW, and then you've got your multi-channel up there, and you can do any editing that you feel like. And maybe I'm just being a if you got it, use it kind of guy, but that's what we're doing. And the last option you have here is your processing. And if you go in here, you have your master compeller. And what your compeller is a compressor / leveler. And then your output delay, you can actually come on and then you can create a delay of what's going back into your computer if you're sending it that way. But typically I would say that these are probably two settings that you don't really need to touch unless you've got a really specific scenario at home. So that's everything under the outputs. Now, if we go into the smart pads, this is where we have a little bit of control over what's on the smart pads. Now, if you want to introduce sound effects into these sound pads, you've got two options. You can either record them directly, or you can use the software and actually drag files in from your computer. So if you click on any of the sound pad buttons here, it brings up a little bit of options here. You can hit your color, and you can change what color you actually want the button to be. So that's this button over here, and if I change it to purple, you see it changes. If I change it to yellow, it changes it back to green, what have you. So that's how you do that. You can change the name of it in here, and it gives you a little keyboard to do that. And if you go to edit, this is where you have a little bit more options. So you can actually from here clip your audio, create fade-ins or fade-outs by dragging from the top part. And this is also where you would physically record your audio. So you would actually hit the record and do it from here. Now going into your options up here. So this is right now one shot, meaning you hit it once and it plays out. If you hit again, now you have toggle. So that means that it turns on and off as you're pressing the button. And then it gives you two options. It gives you the loop on and off and the replay or continue toggle. So basically what that means is if the sound completes and you haven't turned it back off, that it'll just loop back and play from the beginning again. And the replay continue button means if you turn it off and then if you turn it on when it's on replay, it'll start from the beginning again. Or if you have it on continue, it'll actually pick the sound up from where you left off. And then your last option is just to physically clear the button. These arrows over here let you go through your banks of sound pads. So if you hit the arrow, you go to another page. You could also use the arrows down here to do that. But right now on this page, we have a number of different setups for sound effects and things like that. So if I click on voice disguise for a second,
I'm gonna go to edit. Now we can hear me.
I'll turn it off for a second, but this is just one of the many options that we have. And you see all your other options are sitting down here as well, including your echo and reverb that we saw earlier. And then you have other options like your megaphone, so you can turn that on. And now it sounds like you're using a megaphone, and you can obviously use Magic Knob to change the levels of that.
You can go to a robot voice, and you can change the different settings by size of robot. So it's pretty cool to be able to add here.
Or you have these options, and it's just a little bit of a pitch shift. You can do whatever you want here.
So
I can go down low.
Or
I can go up really high.
and then you can make fine tunes.
And then you can fine tune it just by
Make it a little bit lower or a little bit higher. Let's see if I can get close. So how do I sound now? Like, is this a more authoritative voice? Do you like this better? Or we could just turn it off. You can set any of those to any of these pads, and then just by switching really quick,
you can go through them as fast as
you want, and then be happy.
And the other ones that we set up down here, we have our sensor and our ducking. And these are just different ways to cut your mic. There's a lot of different options for those. So if we go into here, we go into edit. So you can see we have sensor. It basically just mutes your mic, and then you have an option. You can put up a beep tone, or you can put in a custom tone of your own. Trash talk, what this is actually going to do is mute your mics to the remote guest, so you and anybody else in the room can actually speak to each other without any remote guests on chat hearing what you're saying. Going to fade in and fade out, so you can use that button and it will actually slowly fade out everything, and you have the settings that you can set on your own for how long that fade takes, and then when you're done, it'll fade it all back in very nicely. So you can get super secretive also by going to back channel. And what that's going to do, you select any sources here, and when you do that, it automatically creates a separate mix just for those channels, so that the main mix doesn't hear those channels anymore, and those ones can still hear each other and communicate together, and it doesn't go out to the actual recording. And then ducking audio will actually basically cut everybody else's audio out except for the host. Hosts are important. They want to say things, but that also includes music and things like that. It'll actually take out all other audio sources just so you can be the one who's heard. And that covers sound pads. Now if we go to display, we've got just very, very simple stuff. So we obviously have our brightness levels, so you can change those. They can be auto and adapted. They can dim after a certain amount of inactivity, all the usual stuff. Same with the buttons, you can set the brightness on those. Metering, so the default on your screen when you're actually monitoring audio doesn't actually have the metering on it, doesn't have the numbers. You just see things jumping up and down and whether or not it goes into yellow and red. So you can turn that on or off, because I mean, for some people, honestly, it doesn't mean anything. To people who know audio a little bit more, it means something. Haptics, so that's really just the feedback that you feel when you're touching buttons on the physical screen. And the record button, there's a couple of options here. So if you go here, you can make it so record only starts a recording, stops a recording. I have the setting on right now that actually has, if you hit it, it actually pauses the recording. So if you have an interruption that you need to stop, you can pause the recording, deal with whatever the interruption is, I don't know, loose goat, what have you, and then just hit the button again to resume the record. To stop the record, all you have to do is press the record in for a couple of seconds, and then it just goes out. Now, another really interesting thing is the ability to affect your show. So right now I have this set as Miscast Commentary, which is my podcast. Again, go down there and check it out. But you can save as many shows as you want. So if you do a number of different podcasts, or say you're somebody who produces for other people, you can save on here all these different shows and then have all of the presets ready for whatever the show is. So if you're taking this from place to place, especially, say you go somewhere and you've got one person who has 4 desks full of pod mics, so you go there and you plug in, and you don't want to go in and have to reset all of the presets for the different mics and all that kind of stuff. No, you would just turn on this show, and all of the presets and everything you've got set up, the order of the faders, what's on the sound pads, everything will default to that show. And you can do that for as many as you want. Once you have created a show and you've got everything set up the way you want it, you need to export it. It's going to save the show to your Rodecaster Pro II, and then to get it back, you just have to hit import. But just so people can see, if you want to create a new show, you just hit new show here, and it gives you the option. It says, do you want to export this before proceeding? So let's just go ahead and export it just to be safe. Done, safety safe. And then you have a setup wizard that you can set up, or you can base it on your current show and then just make changes, or you can just go to a default and it just puts everything back to the default settings, and then you can just kind of start from scratch. The setup wizard is going to ask you a ton of questions. That's going to kind of give you a new base to start from. You can also change the name of your show, obviously, by clicking here and changing the name, or you can change the picture by clicking here and then selecting something that's available. And then you've got some system settings, so you've got a lot of different things in here. Your network stuff, that's so you could set up Wi-Fi or anything like that, or if you're hooked up via Ethernet. Date and time, I think pretty self-explanatory. Bluetooth, this is where you actually manage all your Bluetooth connections. Language, again, self-explanatory, unless you can't understand what I'm saying. MIDI, this one is a pretty important one here. So this is the MIDI controls. So what this is going to do for us is actually gives the ability for the sound pads to become MIDI controllers that can control devices on the computer. So for example, you can get a MIDI plugin for something like OBS, and I'm going to do a separate video on that, but basically what it means is I can create a button here, and then through that plugin say hitting this button does this in OBS. It could change a scene, it could bring up a music cue, it could do any old thing. So now that we're out of the realm of the menus, we can look at the beautiful setup here that we have. So we've got our faders, obviously, and the buttons above, which we've shown opens up these menus for us for every individual microphone and sound setting that we have. But then you have down here. So what you actually have are solo and mute buttons for each individual channel. So what this allows you to do is actually mute out any specific sources that you don't want going out at a specific time. You might mute a person's microphone and then unmute it in time for them to speak for the first time, for example. You might mute something out just to kind of isolate yourself for a second. And then the other part of this that you have is your solo or your listen. So this isn't going to solo and send something out to your mix like that. If I click this and I have music playing, it's not going to change the fact that music's playing for you guys. It's just going to mean I can't hear the music. I can only hear myself, which could again be an important thing because maybe the music would be distracting to me at that given time. You can also solo a number of things at the same time. But again, it's just one of those customizable things that depending on your needs, you know, what you want to be listening to and what you don't want to be listening to, but sending out all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like, I used the term of like a fakey submix in my previous video about this. It's not a real submix by definition, obviously, but it just gives you a little something to work with. It is worth noting that most of the things that you do here don't really have a bearing on the people in the number 2, 3, and 4 positions when listening to their headphones. This is more of a kind of producer's view. In this case, it's the host. The previous model, actually, which I'm kind of disappointed in, there used to be an input in the front. So if one person was kind of producing it and had it in front of them, they'd be able to work with everything and have that come out. And then the host would also be able to hear what the producer could hear and the other 3 people couldn't, which was actually really advantageous to my podcast because the 2 of us needed to be able to hear very specific things and we needed to mute certain things out and all that. Now that's all solved by the routing table because we can actually keep the sources that we want to hear but don't want to go out from going out to the mix because we just tell it not to. You can change the colors of these in this system if you are so inclined. You might do that if you are the kind of person who color codes your whole system. Rode does provide interesting little clips that go around your mic cables and your headphone cables if you want to kind of have all of that color coded and set up and ready to go. And the last thing we haven't really talked about is the micro SD card going into the device itself. If we click up here where the little SD card icon is, it tells you what devices you have here. You can erase the device and actually format it, or you can go in transfer mode, which would allow you to bring the files from the device onto your computer. And the last most obvious thing to show you on this thing is actually how to affect the different levels. I mean, faders are pretty easy. If I bring myself all the way down, continue to bring myself up, I'm talking again. I don't suspect that any of you didn't know how to use a fader, but what we might need to know about are these virtual faders. So that is actually the job of Magic Knob here. So if I click through Magic Knob, it's now controlling Bluetooth, and I click it again, and it's now controlling mic 3, and I click it again, and it's now controlling mic 4. And then as I control mic knob, you see that the fader goes up and down. And then I can use the touch screen to mute and listen like I would down here as well. Now, it's my recommendation that the things that you actually assign to the virtual faders are things that are pretty much set and forget, like you set the level once and you don't really have to worry about it again. This way, if something crazy happens, you can go in and adjust it if you need to, but aside from that, you should be able to leave it alone. It's just one less thing to deal with, and it's just, you can then just deal with the faders that are in front of you, and all will be hunky-dory. Now let's dive into the software to see what other kind of trouble we can get into. So this is the Rode Central app, and it's really simple to use. And if you have multiple devices in here, you'd be able to select amongst them. Right now I have just the one. It gives you the status of your SD card. Currently I don't have a lot of stuff recorded in there, but it would let me know how full my card is. Let's just go into the settings now and just get that kind of boring stuff out of the way. So the first thing you can do is a factory reset, and you can set your monitor out, which can be any device that you actually have in your computer system. So you could theoretically, if you had like another audio interface or something like that, like the Beacon Mix Create or anything like that, you can send this whole output and then make it one single source on there as well, you know, if you're feeling crazy. Now we see that it recognizes what show we're currently on, which is the Miscast commentary. So all the changes that are made are going to be based on that profile. If we go into audio setup, so identical to what you were able to do on the Rodecaster Pro II, you can just drag these things around and swap them and put them in any order that you want, physical faders and your virtual ones. Device configurations, these are all the settings that we had on the Rodecaster as well. Here's all of our brightness stuff for display. You can go to your metering and turn that on and off like we did before, or your haptics, and you can do the same thing here. Your outputs, so again, you set up each individual headphone set, and you can set whatever preset you want for those. And then if you go into system, you can do your MIDI control and your network stuff, everything you were able to do directly on the device. Customizing your smart pads, so you can see right away the first thing you're going to see is that your Rodecaster Pro II will go into transfer mode. So we're going to do that. That actually renders the Rodecaster like non-functional at the moment. You're not actually able to record on it or anything like that. This gives you the opportunity to do a lot more work with these pads. So if I bring one of these up now you can see that I can actually choose files and do all these kinds of things. You can choose a file, you can drag and drop a file, or you could export the file that's on here. So if it's something that you recorded onto a button, so you obviously don't have the file on your computer, you want to save it for another time, you can export it to your computer and then have it for later. Your options to toggle it on and off, or hold, or one shot. Hold's actually one that I forgot to mention when we were going through it before. Hold, when you're doing the button, is basically just as long as you're holding the button down, whatever the effect is works. So if you had like a music thing, you could hold the button down and music would be playing the whole time. The second you took your finger off, it would stop. And then you have your loop options here to turn it on and off, or your replay or continue buttons. So if I did want to swap one of these out for a new file, all I got to do, I'm just going to choose a new file here. You're not seeing this. I'm going to keep it secret from you because that's the kind of person I am. But I could really quickly just take a file like this and click open, and you see how quickly it did that, and it actually changed what the file is. And now when I play that file, it'll play the sound clip, which was actually me on a radio program in Toronto. And then the last thing we have is transfer recordings, which is actually quite a robust little tool. So now we are being placed into transfer mode officially, and we wait for it to load. And when it does, you would find your recordings. So right now I just have this one recording here, and you can play through it and you can set flags throughout the entire thing if you're so inclined. And the really cool thing we have here is this export, which will allow you to change your format. You can send it as WAV or MP3. You can change your sample rate. You can change your bit rate, and you can change your loudness. It goes all the way down. You can't see it's actually scrolling way down. It goes all the way to -25 LUFS. And then from here, you can go from just this custom setting to a number of presets. Depending on where you actually upload your podcasts or whatever you're doing, you can select that one. So let's just go down to the bottom here. We'll select Libsyn. And it presets to what they use on their platform. Now, if I change it and I go to Spotify, we'll see some things change. The loudness changed, the sample rate changed, and the format changed for that matter. So this covers a lot of the big players. So, I mean, for the most part, you can probably get this set up here without using the custom and then not have to second guess any of the settings that you're sending out. And then all you have to do is hit export, and it just sends right to your computer. Now to exit transfer mode, you actually have to do that on the physical machine. So all you got to do, it's on the screen, and you just have to, and we've exited that mode now. But my dear friends, that should cover it. That is the Rodecaster Pro II. Like I said, I am going to do a deep dive into the MIDI controls and stuff like that. Just because it's such a big subject, it needs to be its own video. Otherwise, I have to basically take up half of this video just talking about MIDI controls, and none of us want that. If there's anything specific that you want to know how to do on this Rodecaster Pro II, or if you want to know how it compares to some other devices, then please leave them down in the comments and let me know what you think. I do hope you enjoyed the video though. Make sure that you hit like and subscribe, comment down below. Like I said, if you've got nothing to say to me, just leave anything down there. Leave your favorite word, but make it a nice word, family friendly, okay? Click the bell so you don't miss a video when they're released. And if you want to see some past tutorials I've done, why don't you check out these guys? And until next time, gang, let's get to work.